Hey guys, it's Danny. Welcome to another episode from our Basic Houseplant Care for Beginners series. Today we're going to talk about African violets, specifically how to propagate them through leaves. It is such an easy process and it's very rewarding to watch a little baby plantlet grow from a tiny little thing to an entire plant. And throughout the years, I did show you a few of these propagations, but today I'm going to compile everything you should know as a beginner in one single, very easy to follow video. Today's video, together with this entire series, is sponsored by rePotme.com, who not only offers you everything you could possibly need to take care of orchids, but also houseplants, including African violets. And in fact, they actually have a totally separate division on their website for African violets. From soils to pots, fertilizers, and accessories, you can find everything you need on the rePotme website and also the African violet section that they have. So I will link you down below to their website. Feel free to check them out at any time. I myself do use a lot of their products even before I started to work with them. So I'll link you to a few that are my absolute favorites. Maybe some of them I will be using in today's video as well. We'll see. But with that said, let's get started. Let's start with the beginning, right? So you have your beautiful African violet. In order to propagate it, you need it to be mature. Luckily, the African violets that you find in flower shops are indeed mature because typically you find them in bloom. And if they have flowers, they are most likely mature. Now, the reason we want them to be already mature is because you want to take leaves that are fully grown and not very young, but also not strip too much the African violet of leaves. Choosing the leaf is important as well. First of all, like I said, you don't want very young leaves because they are still developing. And you also don't want very old leaves. I'm going to give you a close-up and show you. Because they might not be as healthy, they might have spots on them, or simply they might already be almost on their way out. So you want a leaf that is somewhere in the middle. And if you look at the African violet, you will notice that it tends to have rows. The first row is the one next to the crown, very young leaves. Second row, not so young, but not yet mature either. Third row of leaves down is usually where you want to take the leaves from, third or fourth, depending on the African violet, because they are not too old, but not immature. So from this row, we want to take a full leaf with the stem. Now to do so, I would not really recommend you using scissors or pruners or things of the sorts because the stems are very succulent. So when you're gonna cut, you're not actually going to cut the stem, but rather crush it to some extent. And that can make the stem too damaged to produce roots. So what I recommend you do is find yourself a type of knife. I'm using a scalpel type of thing. This is from rePotme. Not sure if they still have it, but I do think they have a different type of scalpel, one that is more heavy duty. This is pretty flimsy, but I took care of it and it lasted me a long time. Even if it's, plasticky, it still cuts very well. So with this, we want to go close to the actual central stem of the African violet and do a clean cut. With a very thin knife like a scalpel, we make sure that we don't damage the stem, and the chances of it rooting properly and creating new baby plantlets are very high. Now, don't worry if you don't have this type of knife. Anything can do as long as it's thin and as long as you make a clean cut. You can remove leaves without any type of tools. If you just pull them to the side, they should snap right off. The downside is, if you don't have too much experience, you can actually remove too little of a stem, and that can be a little uncomfortable. And also, if your African violet is not hydrated enough, maybe you skipped watering day and it becomes soft, removing it by pulling the stem is not going to work all that well. So either water your African violet prior to removing the leaves or use one of those very sharp thin knives. As a side note, older leaves can actually root and sprout baby plantlets as well. But it is preferred to have a younger leaf just because the chances are higher for this one to root, and also the quantity of baby plants generally is higher with not such an old leaf. That's why we prefer to use these leaves. But if you want to try out on an old leaf, why not? It's fun. How many leaves do you want to remove? 2, 3 typically, just to give you a better chance of obtaining baby plants. But obviously try not to remove too many leaves from your African violet. You still want to leave some leaves for it to photosynthesize and continue to grow. On mine, I can definitely remove a few more without any type of worry, but let's say if I would leave any less than this, or maybe this, I might experience some slow growth on my African violets. So do try to leave a rosette that looks something like this on your African violet, depending on the size. Everything else can definitely be removed. Next up, what do we do with the leaves that we just took off? Well, in the case of this leaf, which was just pulled off, we need to make a cut with a sharp knife at an angle, preferably, just to make sure that we have a clean section for the roots to start sprouting. In the case of this leaf, we don't actually need to do anything more. Now, if you did not cut it at an angle, don't worry. Actually, propagated African violets with their stems cut however many different ways there are, and I didn't find any difference. But cutting the stem at an angle can help you insert the leaf in soil better, if that's the technique you want to use. So let's go ahead and speak about water propagation versus soil propagation. Very self-explanatory, water propagation implies you putting the leaf with its stem in water. So you can find a tiny little jar. This is actually coming from an aquarium test kit, something that doesn't have a very big opening so that you can rest the leaf on top and only have the stem submerged. My level of water is a little low. Let me top it off a little bit. There we go. So you want at least ½ an inch or 2 centimeters or so of the stem inside the water. From this point on, it can take anywhere from 1 week to 3-4 weeks for you to see some tiny little roots sprouting. If you see the roots forming, you know that the stem is viable, the leaf is viable. Obviously, if the leaf remains hydrated and in good shape, it doesn't just flop over, it means you did a very good job. However, it doesn't mean you can go ahead and pot it in soil just yet. Usually, we need to wait for the tiny green little nubs to form. Those are the baby plantlets. And at some point, you'll see they will start to create tiny little leaves. Well, usually that's when I like to place them in soil. Now, from there, it can take another few weeks for the baby plantlets to grow big enough for you to separate them. Actually, it's more like a couple of months or so, or 3 to 4 months, depending on your temperature as well. The higher the temperature, the faster the baby plantlets will develop, and vice versa. Of course, if it's cold, it can take a little bit longer. So we're gonna get to what we need to do next after we discuss about soil propagation as well. Now, soil propagation is something I don't typically enjoy because the chances of this stem rotting, I find, are a little higher in soil propagation. Also, the leaf can actually get dehydrated in soil propagation since it will not have direct contact with water to get hydrated. So if you want to use soil propagation, I would suggest that you water your African violet very well prior to removing the leaves so that the leaf has more moisture to work with from the get-go. Sellers actually use this method a lot because it doesn't take up space, it doesn't take up resources, and it's pretty quick. Also, some people say that the roots that form in the soil will not go through that transitional phase that I personally have never experienced, but maybe other people did. So that can be considered a bonus as well. So what we need to do after we remove the leaf is that we make sure the stem is cut at a little bit of an angle. This will help us insert it into the soil. Get a little pot of soil. You can also use solo cups or these tiny espresso cups. You need to make some holes for drainage and just stick the stem inside, like so. It's really easy. At this point, you need to water it really well. And furthermore, what I find helps a lot is providing a dome for humidity. So something like this, a cloche, is absolutely perfect. If you have a bigger cloche, maybe you can put several of these tiny little cups to conserve space, but keeping the leaf under the cloche will provide moisture. In the case of soil propagation, this is really important because the leaf will start to dehydrate. When we put leaves in water, the stem will immediately start to absorb that water. So dehydration is pretty much impossible unless the stem is starting to rot. But if the stem is in good shape, we do not need to cover this with anything. No need for humidifiers or cloches or anything of the sorts. I'm a little biased towards this technique because I find it just a little bit easier and funner to see the roots form. But I do also believe that soil propagation will benefit from keeping everything a little bit more moist. Now, obviously, you can propagate these leaves in other stuff as well, such as leca or sphagnum moss or perlite. To be fully honest, it does not really matter the type of propagation medium you are using. What you need to do is provide moisture for the stem, and you can provide moisture in 100 different ways, no matter the material you're using. Right, so let's wrap up this particular segment. You need to leave the leaf in water or in soil for a few weeks at this point and keep an eye on it. If you're propagating in water, you will see everything forming. If not, in soil, you will need to wait for the tiny little plantlets to form. In the case of water propagation, at some point when you see the tiny little leaves form, you need to plant it into soil. Now, the way I like to do it is to try and leave a few of those little leaves on top of the soil so that they have light to photosynthesize. I find that they grow a lot better and faster if they already have access to light and air. The roots, all of them, they need to be buried into the soil, but the leaves or those little green nubs, as much as possible, I like to leave them on the surface. So I try to arrange a little bit the grains of soil in such a way to accommodate for the leaves to be in the air and for the roots to be under the soil. And at this point, I try to keep that soil quite moist. The roots are coming from water, so if I try to keep the soil way too airy, I will definitely shock them. Reason why maybe some people experience this little bit of a setback or acclimation period that they say happens when you transfer roots from water to soil. I find that if I keep the soil moist enough, I don't have any issues and the leaf and the plants just grow normally. So now we are at the stage where our leaves have tiny little baby plantlets all around them. At this point, you don't need to do anything other than care for the plant, just like you would for an African violet. What we need to do is wait for those baby plantlets to grow big enough so that they can be separated. So let me bring a leaf that has some babies which need to be separated. And here we are. We can see the initial leaf is this, and we have in this particular one 2 baby plants. I feel like other African violets will produce more baby plants. I do see this particular variety only produces a few baby plants, but from one leaf you can actually obtain multiple babies, like 4 or 5. It's absolutely common. What we need to do is separate all of these baby plants individually and pot them separately. With African violets, we don't really want to have multiple crowns in one place because they will just start to push each other around and some of them will shade the others. It's not a good look. It's not necessarily good for the mother plant to have multiple crowns just fighting for light, pretty much. So when we reach this stage where we can clearly see a rosette and we do have some decently looking leaves, they don't necessarily need to be as big as the initial leaf, we can go ahead and separate the baby plant. So what we need to do is completely remove everything from the pot so we can better see what we're doing. Now here's a nice trick. You can actually repropagate, if you want, the mother leaf. If you just cut the stem yet again and plop it in water or directly in soil, it can actually create a new set of baby plantlets. So I am gently removing the soil from the root ball just to see how many baby plantlets I have. And I do have to, do we see them? There we go. This is the bigger baby plant and this is a tiny, tiny little one here. So what we're gonna do is pull on the mother leaf gently. We can see it still has roots. And also, I'm gonna pull gently on the baby plant, the tiny one and the big one. I'm trying to hold them by, let's say, their bottom stems or the beginning of the root system. And just jiggle or wiggle them a little bit. There we go. They are very fragile, but they are resilient. So this is the baby plant that I'm interested in. It looks great. It has a great low root system. So what I'm gonna do is find an adequate pot, and we'll talk a little bit about pot size. Now, choosing pot size is quite a delicate challenge, and many people have many different ideas. If you will go on the African Violet Society or if you visit expert advice, they will tell you not to go too big with the pot. It's important to understand why they say this, because I do feel that the conclusion is wrong many of the times. So personally, I did pot my African violets in really huge pots in the past, and I have to say I had great results. I never had African violets that didn't bloom properly. I actually had quite amazing African violets in very big pots. However, in my opinion, the problem with bigger pots generally is that they can retain more water than you should. African violets do enjoy moisture, but they do enjoy quite a lot of air at the same time. They're not epiphytic, they're not like orchids, but in comparison to other terrestrial houseplants, they don't tolerate very compacted soil as well. One way to make sure that the soil remains aerated is to offer smaller sizes of pots because they retain less water. Hence, through water evaporation, they dry faster. So if we use the same type of medium in this pot compared to this pot, and we also use the same plant, this one will stay more moist than it should. And a pot that stays moist all the time typically has the air pockets clogged with water for long periods of time. This can lead to root rot through suffocation. If you make your medium airy enough for this not to happen, theoretically and logically you will not have issues, right? And this is the logic that I always applied with my plants and my plant growth. And surprise, surprise, I never had issues. But I made sure the soil was not compacted. However, for this beginner-friendly video and tutorial, I will stick with the advice that you should give tinier pots. Pots that will fit the root ball, but they will not leave a whole lot of space. So visually, we can see this pot is kind of big, right, for this plant. It will take up too much space. But this pot, which actually is tinier than the diameter of the rosette, this looks a little bit more fitting, right? This is actually an espresso cup. So I'm gonna make some drainage like this. It's very important to have drainage. Just like any other houseplant, African violets need drainage. If water accumulates, those air pockets are going bye-bye, and we don't want that. The soil that I'm using is a combination of an all-purpose soil that I added some perlite to. It's almost about a 50-50 mixture. I'm gonna put a layer of soil on the bottom. Then I'm gonna place the plant inside, and I will make sure that I'm not gonna have any buried leaves. The plant, though, should not be very, very tall in its pot. So let's just place soil around the plant. If you get dirt on the leaves, don't worry. I'm gonna show you how to remove it really efficiently and fast. So I'm not gonna worry too much if soil goes everywhere. With this size, it's inevitable that the soil would just go everywhere. There we go. Now, I didn't compact the soil way too much, and if I want to be extra about it, I'm gonna take a bamboo skewer, go on the sides of the pot, and wiggle it a little bit. This will make sure that I don't have very big air pockets. We like air pockets, but tiny, tiny ones, not big ones. Big air pockets can actually make some of the roots just dry off and not grow. With epiphytes, we don't have an issue with big air pockets, but with terrestrials, we actually do. So I think the soil is absolutely okay. The plant looks nice. And what I need to do now is offer it water. So let's do that really fast. All right, so generally I would do this at the sink, but I'm gonna sacrifice the dryness of the tray for you guys. What I wanna do first is water it from above. I'm gonna try to add water as much as to not cover the plant or the crown, but just let it go down and water the entire pot. If you're working with pretty dryish soil like I did, it will take a little bit for the soil to absorb that water. Initially, it will repel it to some extent. So what I like to do is after I run water through the pot, I actually sit the pot in some water. Or let this water that just pooled here under the pot, let it stay there, maybe in a dish or a decorative pot. And after a few hours, I'm gonna come back and remove whatever excess I still have, because what happens now is that the pot starts to absorb this water from below and directly to the top. So in order to saturate the soil, not only do I need to water from above, but also let it soak. But this is the first watering. What I typically like to do is water from below. So in the case of these pots, I like to put them in decorative containers like this. I like to place some water inside and then place the violet inside the decorative pot and let it absorb the water from below. And this is because if I try to water from above, it's a little bit more difficult to reach the actual soil. I'm just gonna water the crown, and if I let water sit in the crown, it it might lead to some rotting. Doesn't always happen, but sometimes it does, particularly in cooler months. And it's also a little bit more time consuming removing or getting all of these leaves rather out of the way and pouring water. What I like to do is just pick it up, put water, put it back in, and hey presto, I watered my African violet. And I kind of got into a routine. I know how much water to put inside this decorative pot so that I don't have a lot of excess. And many of the times I don't go back to remove the excess after a few hours. I do random checks from time to time, but I kind of got the routine down, and this is something you're gonna learn as well in time, the more you water your plant. So at this point, all that's left to do is to just enjoy the plant. Just give it general African violet care and you should do just fine. So anyway, that is about it on propagating these plants through leaves. I do have multiple other videos from the past. If you want to see some actual examples, check them down below. I will link you to them down below, but I do hope this tutorial will help you out, and stay tuned for more African violet videos. Alrighty guys, so thank you so much for watching. Thank you rePotme for sponsoring yet another episode from our Plant Care for Beginners series. If you want to stay in touch with me on other social media, just search for me. I'm at MissOrchidGirl pretty much everywhere. Subscribe to my short form content channel if you don't like long tutorials. But most importantly, do subscribe to this channel because this is where I post all of the good stuff. So that said, I'll see you next time. Bye!